Well, on October 2nd, we will be delivered a reality check, unlike any other that we've seen. The fact is that oil revenue is down. Foreign exchange is now a rarity, and that's a reality. But are we doing enough to generate? Because are we still thinking within the box and the confines that we know? Oil and gas. Every time we talk about the forex situation, I hear the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance say, well, the energy revenue is down. We get that. So what are you doing outside to gain outside the energy sector? Well, this morning, Denise Deming and Brian Frunton join us on set this morning. We talk tourism, a sector that has been considered by many the bastard child of our economy because it's been given very little attention. Good morning. How are you both?
Good morning.
Good morning. We're fine, thank you.
Now, you know, in his budgetary allocation, in terms of looking at some research that I did, tourism stakeholders, and this is an article from earlier this year, are calling for a meeting with the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Tourism to voice their concerns and propose solutions for boosting the tourism sector. 3 quarters later, we're now in the last quarter of 2017. Do we have those proposals? Are things any better?
You know, and I think it's a very good segue. Good morning again, Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning. 1 week away, just about, for the national budget is a very good time to have a conversation of how this fiscal has unfolded. And what a national budget seeks to do, in my mind, is account for the stewardship of the spend of public funds, one, through demonstrating performance over the past fiscal, revenue collection, expenditure, and results. That's the first half of it. And also proposing a plan for the upcoming fiscal that's predicated on, again, certain planning criteria. But requesting, that's the most important part, the approval of the country through the parliament, that's really what it is, for continued expenditure. So do citizens have a say in the conversation of reviewing and assessing past performance? Do private sector bodies like the THRT have a role in that? We do. But we need to draw proper key performance indicators to make that assessment. So what we've done is looked at 3 to 4 areas to assess how this entire fiscal has run. One, as you rightfully said, the allocations to the budget. The allocations to the tourism budget as it relates just to destination marketing, if we could focus on that, because that's the real core area of activity. That has fallen by 62% from 2015 to 2017, the start of last year's budget, which means we moved from 50 million TT to 19 million, as you said earlier. As of July this year, the Ministry of Tourism indicated that only 8 million of the 19 was actually spent. So we're not talking only about lowered allocations. We're talking about the inability to actually deploy what limited amounts are there. The second area we look to international arrivals. How do we actually see whether this marketing spend is translated into increased numbers? And again, we have a circumstance where apples to apples, in August 2015, we welcomed 300,000 persons to Trinidad and Tobago, international arrivals, unique visitors. As of August 2017, that figure is down to 275,000, which is a 9% drop. Parallel to this, we also look at hotel data. Occupancy in 2015 was in the range of 68%. It's now down to 60%. All the indicators suggest a couple of things. Lowered allocations, which in our mind means a lower prioritization in the budget, the inability to execute tourism programs. And why do we say that? There's challenges to the institutional capacity that government has to do so. When we look at the closure of TDC, that was protracted not from March to June as announced, but actually March to just a few weeks ago, in August, when we finally got the matter settled with a lot of industrial issues along the way. But you had 140 traumatized individuals who decided that this matter of their future and longevity was probably more important at a personal level than considering the matters of tourism. That's the reality. Another reality, a little-known reality, I should say, is when it comes to overseas representation, the country has had traditionally third-party companies that represent Trinidad and Tobago's interest in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, in Scandinavia and the European countries. In October 2016, first month of the fiscal, the Ministry of Tourism cancelled all the contracts except the UK. What that means, invariably, Hema, is that besides the collapse of the institution TDC, there has been no overseas representation for Trinidad and Tobago in any of our traditional largest source markets for the past year.
So we're not getting the word out. And, you know, speaking about getting the word out and getting the right message out, so let me ask you, has anything, from that meeting till now, has anything been delivered? Brian paints a very grim, dark picture for the tourism sector. Is that the reality?
That is the reality. It's worse than dark and grim. The tourism industry, the sector, has collapsed. And you can look at it from end to end. Sandals visited the TTHDI recently. And Sandals is generally their first port of call to find employees, to find interns. And there's a reason for that. Our product is an excellent product. As a private sector institution, because that's what we are, we focus on delivering really, really well-trained students. Think of what the withdrawal or the withholding of our gate returns, think of what that would do to a private institution. You have $5.1 million that the government owes us. How are we going to operate with that $5.1 million not being available to us? It means you're carrying an overdraft. You can't carry an overdraft for the government. But the reason I'm saying that that has contributed to the collapse of the entire industry, and this is government action, is that for Sandals to function, it requires at least 1,500 new workers, new employees. Where are we getting those from? The TTHDI would traditionally graduate maybe about 250 students every year. So what really needed to happen is you needed to ramp up TTHDI so that you can supply that 1,500, unless you have another plan in terms of where you're going to get that 1,500 workers from. So when we talk about the collapse of the industry, and it has happened because of the government's deficit in implementation. When we talk about that, we're talking about that end to end. We're talking from the supply of the workers right through to what are you doing, right through to some of the issues that Brian has spoken about.
Brian, now listening to you, I hear both you and Ms. Deming talk about the government. Then the flip side of the argument, why is the private sector not leading this charge? We have amazing products. In Jamaica, and we just spoke to an element of Jamaica. You know, I'm always amazed that Jamaica gets their tourism products so well because their organizations are so well integrated.
Correct.
Why is the private sector not doing the same?
And here's the and I love that question. I always do. The private sector and hotels are probably the reasons why people are still coming to Trinidad and Tobago. Let me explain what that means. Hotels do spend significant funds advertising not just their properties but Trinidad and Tobago. How do they do that? With the advent of online travel agencies such as Expedia.com, Hotels.com, etc., hotels physically based in Trinidad now have an international platform to list not just their rooms but their destination and why you should visit. Because it's one thing to say, come visit this 4-star property, but why make the trip in the first instance is usually attached to that ad. The cost of that ad ranges between 15 to 30% of each booking. So to put it in perspective, every $100 that you earn by a person making a booking, $15 to $30 is paid to Expedia, just for the privilege of advertising, okay? $10 goes to government as room tax, and hotels pay that as a unique tax to only hoteliers, which means no other industry pays 10% off its top-line revenue, not its bottom-line profit, except the oil and gas sector. So we're talking about 25 to 40% of payments, part to government and part for marketing. The private sector, as individual properties, can only do so much. What is needed, clearly in the Jamaican other models, is an integration of that same allocation that we're talking about to government to complement, to augment, to amplify the individual properties marketing efforts, because they're still doing it at a very narrow, small level.
And they're still doing it on their own, if I can take, if that's basically what you're saying. In particular, the Sandals project, Ms. Deming, has been heralded as basically the savior of this industry. When people refer to the Sandals, I see it as this moment, this aha moment in the tourism. No, but that's how it is. You know, you listen to the politicians market this, and you see that Sandals coming here is really one of the ticks that we are supposed to make in 2018. Is it going to save the industry?
No, it will not. Sandals is an excellent addition, but it's folly to think that Sandals alone will impact and save the entire industry. This industry needs dreamers and thinkers and leaders. And I really believe that that is where the deficit is. We're not able to see things. I'll give you an example. We have sporting facilities, in some strategic sporting facilities in central Trinidad. What is required is bedrooms around those sporting facilities, not high-class, top-level hotels. Because it's for sports people. They operate at a different kind of level. But does the government have the courage to incentivize the central part of this island? In terms of their action, in terms of my observation of the budget, I haven't seen that. The budget speaks to another new property. When are we going to do that? Where is it going to be? Is it the one that is supposed to be at the Ministry of Agriculture? And if that is the case, what has happened to the St. Clair Police Station that is adjacent to the Ministry of Agriculture property? It has come to only, the concrete slab has been casted, and all the uprights for whatever, the electricals and so on, that's all there. But it has stopped. So is it that we're saying that because we plan to put a new hotel next to it, we've stopped the building of the police station? It can't be that. So when people talk about that, we keep asking for government. The context in which we operate is that the government must identify the infrastructure and they must facilitate what needs to be done.
Right, you know, when you look at the fact that only 2% or less than 2% of the 30 million international visitors to the region come to this country. What is the net earnings of the tourism sector now? And let's talk, maybe you can give me a comparison as to 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Well, I mean, when you start looking about earnings, people like to do the whole the trickle-down effect throughout the sector. Let's go to real earnings. We track through an international report out of the States called the Smith Travel Report, what governments earn by way of taxation. And every year, the hotels in Trinidad and Tobago contribute in excess of 60 million TT dollars to government in terms of tax revenue from the hotel tax. When you hear numbers of $8 million reinvested towards marketing, the question is, where is the $50 million itself going? Where's the difference going? So the dwindle we're seeing is the reinvestment rate between what is remitted in tax. That tax, 58 million, is dropping every year. We've seen it fall, because every year, as hotel revenue falls, the taxation would fall. But we've seen a lower reinvestment of that particular tax dollars towards marketing. That has a very, almost a vicious cycle effect, because lower taxes, lower revenues means lower purchasing by the hotels, staff constraints about keeping staff at a certain level, less days and cycles of employment for individuals, and overall there's a contraction from the only sector outside of oil and gas that is a net earner of foreign exchange.
I've always thought, I just think it's logical that if we can't get it from the energy sector, you look to creative ways, agriculture and tourism, quick fixes, but no one seems to get that. The Hospitality Institute, is it going to be sustained? Can it be sustained?
I would confidently say yes, because it's a private sector institution, that we provide a product that the government has engaged us on. So, for example, we receive a subsidy that has been cut back significantly without any conversation around its cutback. The quid pro quo on that was that we would keep tuition fees at a certain level. But if you take back your subsidy, can I keep tuition fees at that level anymore? We have to reconsider that. The second part of it is the gate issue, that it is really a debt the government owes to the Institute, and not only to the Institute, but it is a promise that the government has broken to the citizens of this country. It has said to the citizens, we will pay your gate. Yeah. That means you have to pay it. You can't tell us you don't have money this time. Come on. Every student that goes through, we've had to provision for.
How many students have you lost?
I think we've lost about 115.
The TDC, I can't have you both on set talking about the TDC, and that is the elephant in the room. The TDC is no more. Was it necessary? And now with this new streamlined super entity, how is it going to work? And let's keep in mind there's a THA regulation that still exists.
The TDC, the destruction of TDC, which happened way after my very short stint. So I'm very, very comfortable to say, not me. That didn't happen under me. But the destruction of TDC is extremely unfortunate because, again, what it is saying is that the country does not have the capacity to run these state sector institutions. And from the beginning, my position was there were master plans, there were all kinds of plans. What was required was implementation and government and their representatives stepping away from the day-to-day operations, from the decisions about who goes to a trade show, from the decisions about which ship you're going to engage with and so on. That's not your competence. Having put a board in place, what is required is that you give the board the space to operate. And I am on public record saying that governments must not use those institutions, all of them, the full range of them, at their convenience.
Was that the fate of TDC?
I think historically that has been the fate of TDC and TDC's predecessor organizations.
Brian, TDC's no more. Streamlined. The Prime Minister himself said he was taking charge of the tourism portfolio at one time.
Sure. Cecil Miller is the report that we keep hearing about that justified. The government is predicated their entire decision-making on this one consultant from Barbados's report. I can put on a record that no private sector agency in tourism, and there are at least 3 to 4 major ones, ever recommended the need for closure of the TDC from inception. There was no need to make TDC Trinidadian focus, to collapse it. You simply needed to take out the Tobago aspect and leave it for the THA, as you mentioned, to do exclusively. And the TDC in Trinidad could have been easily, quickly, and probably even more cost-effectively repurposed. Here's what's happened. We understand in June this year, a new entity was registered in the registry. It calls for 50 workers. It's very narrow in its mandate. A second agency is being contemplated called the Regulatory Authority. Based on the legislative requirements to get that entity up and running to allow for the regulation of the sector, we're looking at least mid-2018 to even have a conversation. What does that mean here in the short run? Is that the industry, without a TDC, without the new entity, is now unregulated. I need to stress on why that is important. With the advent of disruptive interventions such as the Airbnb, we now have hoteliers, legitimate hoteliers, who tell me that on Expedia, there are properties being listed, Trinidad and Tobago properties, that aren't certified or regulated or have any standard, and guests are coming back to the hotel saying, we just had a horrid experience by this space we saw on Expedia. And as a destination, we're not thinking about what that means for our reputation. We're allowing parties to promote accommodation without the necessary regulation.
I know we're running out of time for this interview. What do you want to hear from the Minister on October 2nd in relation to tourism?
I think the Minister could cut and paste what he had in the 2017 budget and just do it this time.
Brian, same question to you.
I think it's going to be defining very clearly how are you going to implement, even if it is in a stage and phase basis, percentages of what you're saying you're going to do. Most importantly, consulting in public and executing behind closed doors without consultation or without partnership with the private sector is a recipe for failure. We have seen the results of engaging the stakeholders and then trying to do it on your own behind closed doors. It doesn't work.
Well, I've come to the end of my segment of today's show. Ryan Bechu is coming up next, and what we're going to do is share with you a very short interview that I did yesterday with some guests who are promoting Ram Leela. We also talk about tourism. There's cultural tourism as well in our country that we just can't seem to get right. Stay with us. This is the Morning Brew.